Hey everyone, welcome to Build. Just a quick video today. I got a cool voice I want to show you with the synthesizer. I was able to get a really sweet sounding heavy metal guitar using only modules, which is pretty cool. So stay tuned after the break to check that out. All right, everyone. So I'm trying something different here today. I'm going to use the whiteboard to talk through the patch, and then we'll go back over to the synthesizer and actually showcase what it looks like with actual modules. But the idea here is basically just to show what the patch looks like on paper, so that way when we talk about it on the modules, you don't have to try and chase wires around to understand what's going on. So the root of this patch is noise. Noise is really important. Noise is random. Right? If this is my frequency spectrum, from 0 hertz to, let's call it 20K, white noise technically is an even distribution of frequencies across the spectrum. So for our purposes, we're going to be using noise to really drive our patch. It's really the root of the patch, but it's not as simple as just plain noise. Plain noise just sounds like noise, right? We have to do something with it. And so to actually make it useful, we're going to be using a kind of chain essentially to shape the noise, turn that into pitch, and then use that pitch with a combination of distortion to really get a nice guitar sound. So one of the first things I want to talk about with noise is envelopes. So if you think about our, kind of broad spectrum noise, it covers everything. Right? There's no shape to it. It's essentially shapeless. If you were to compare it to an image, it would be gray, right? It's just a gray blob. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any sort of information related to it. But we have these fun things in synthesizers called envelopes, right? And what an envelope does, drawing our fun graph again, is it, pun intended, it packages up things, right? So everyone kind of, at this point, you probably are familiar with the standard ADSR envelope, right? You have your A for attack, your decay, your sustain, and then your release, right? And as you progress through time, that envelope fires, whatever it's covering underneath will kind of grow and then come back down and then go away entirely, right? And you can hold the voltage at the sustain point and it will stay there until you let it go with a gate. So we can use gates to shape noise. So if I imagine my spectrum before, I'm going to fill this with noise, right? I'm going to use our envelope to kind of open and close something, and that something underneath whatever I'm opening or closing is going to be noise. That's how you get a lot of percussive sounds, right? You can have a really quick attack and a really quick decay, and maybe that's it. Maybe there is no sustain or release, and you progress really quickly through the envelope and you get a nice percussive sound because you hear the raspiness of the white noise underneath, and then you fire the envelope and it is really quick, like tss, 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 right? Your snare hit or your cymbal hit sounds like that. We're not going to be doing that here, right? We don't want that. That's obviously very percussive. What we want is something more like a guitar strum in order to achieve a guitar sound, which makes sense. So if you think about a guitar, right, you got our 5 strings and you strum over them, right? So you're hitting them individually. Boom, 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 boom. Here's our 5th string, boom, right? You're not hitting them all at once. You actually are kind of, playing them, right? Boom, boom. Right? You can hear them individually, but they're relatively succinct when they're all played together. So we can do that in modular with really funky envelopes, right? We can do something similar. So in order to accomplish this, I'm using the Chaos Devices Zadar. And the reason I'm doing that is because Zadar has some really funky envelopes. And they work the same, but they behave totally different, right? They have very strange shapes for what you would classically consider an envelope. So if I look at the Zadar envelope that I'm using for this strumming effect, if this is my, pattern over time, what it actually looks like is something like with all of these kind of jagged peaks that taper off, right? And then each of these are these kind of individual spikes, and you can almost imagine them as the individual strings getting strummed as we progress over the envelope. So under it, I still have my noise, and in this case, I'm just using a VCA, right? So the envelope is opening and closing a VCA. The VCA, from an audio perspective, it just has noise into it. So the envelope is the CV input into the VCA, and then the audio is the noise, right? So you get this strumming effect as it opens and closes really rapidly over the noise sound. And then we take that, and then we take it and put it into rings. Rings is already, very much a, in some of its modes, it's got sympathetic strings, right? Where it actually just sounds kind of like a sitar or something like that, where it has a ring modulation that is really designed to sound like strings. So we take, rather than the kind of strum or trigger input into rings, we end up using the audio input, right? So I'm just going to draw this patch out just so we can talk about it. So I have my noise, and pardon my terrible handwriting. That's going to go into my VCA. And my VCA is going to be modulated by my envelope to open and close it. And the audio output of my VCA is going to go into the audio input of rings. And then the other part of it is that rings needs pitch. None of this here has any real pitch to it. It's just noise, right? So if I didn't give it any pitch, it would play the same note over and over again, which maybe that's what you want, maybe not. So we're going to feed it pitch from our sequencer. So now this alone, if you were to not add the distortion on it, this is actually a decent sounding guitar sound to begin with. A more acoustic guitar sound to be sure, but still a decent replica of a guitar sound within a synthesizer. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. It doesn't have the same kind of intonation or strumming differences that a real guitar player would have, but it does an approximation of it, right? So certainly something to play around with by itself, and we'll show this when we get to the modular to see what that sounds like alone. The rest of this patch is actually really simple. We're going to take the output of rings and we're going to put it into our 100 grit, which is just distortion, right? Nothing really fancy here. We're not doing any crazy modulation. I do have DivKid Ochd just modulating it, the frequency sweep, just kind of open and close it just to give it some life, but it's not really necessary. And then finally, for fun, we're going to put that into some reverb. And that's the basis of our patch, right? So, pardon my terrible diagramming here, but audio flows kind of this counterclockwise way. Noise being opened and closed, noise going into a VCA being opened and closed by our kind of strummy envelope. That's going into rings. Rings is picking up the pitch data there to actually give us a, something that sounds on tune. And then we're taking that into the 100 grit to give it some distortion. And then we're putting it out in the reverb. And then that's going back into the recording. So without that, with some quick movie magic here, we are going to switch over and take a look at the synthesizer. All right, everyone. So we're at the synth now, and we're going to talk about how this patch actually works. So I'm going to do my best to try and talk about this. I know the camera angle, you can only see so much. You can kind of make out the screen of Zadar here, which is really the key. I'm sorry for that. Hopefully we'll improve over time as I learn how to do this. But let's just start by talking about what's happening. So for this patch, it's a longer song. I'm not going to play the whole song. I've been working on it. It's not perfect yet. I don't know if it'll ever be perfect, but it sounds pretty cool. So I'm just going to play you the intro really quick so you can hear what it sounds like. So that should hopefully give you an idea of the sound we're trying to achieve here, right? And how we did it. So I have Hermod set up. Voice 1 has pitch, gate, and velocity data coming out of it. So we're using the gate and velocity are going into Zadar, and the velocity is interesting. So Zadar allows you to CV various parameters of the envelope. In this case, we're using it to kind of attenuate the depth of the envelope. So a very hard hit note will make the peak of the envelope, significantly higher. A kind of lower hit, a lower velocity note will make the peak lower. And that gives us a little bit of control. Like, you can think of it as how hard we're strumming on that guitar to get that sound. So I want to play you just the noise out of Zadar. And I'm going to do that. We're going to go into the Desmodus Versio. It's on fully dry right now. So you're only going to hear the noise. There's not going to be, hopefully, any reverb. It'll sound in stereo, but that's okay. So we're going to take this output, the audio is right, this blue guy. So if we take the audio and we're going to swap it over here, and I'm going to turn this up slowly because I don't know how loud this is going to be, and we play our sequence again. That's what we're strumming. That is our strum sound. And you can kind of see on the envelope as this fires, it's finger-like, right? There's these kind of fingers on this first part, and then as it progresses over really quick, it changes the shape of it. It really changes the shape of the noise, right? So it's not just this straight white noise. It doesn't sound like a snare hit. It doesn't sound like a cymbal hit. It sounds, you can hear the individual kind of peaks of it as it goes through. So that's the noise by itself. So let's take that noise and let's put it back into where it was going, which was rings. So I've rigged that same noise output from our VCA is now going into the audio input on rings. And let's hear what that sounds like. And the other part to note is that we have the voltage per octave input, aka pitch data, that's coming from Hermod, and that's from our sequence. So what does that sound like? So that does sound like a guitar, right? You hear the strum effect as it, kind of triggers rings multiple times as that envelope fires, right? We hear each of those little individual peaks as it goes through. So not a whole lot is going on special here, right? We have rings in sympathetic string mode, monophonic voice. The dampening is actually being malted from our envelope. So the dampening is actually following along with the envelope from Zadar. If I didn't have that, it's probably not going to make too much of a difference. A little bit, right? You can definitely, it gives it more of a ring to it, which makes sense, right? You're hearing more decay. But it's not a huge difference. If you didn't have the multiple cable and you didn't want to do that, that's fine. Frequency tuning, all of that is set to this specific patch, but that's nothing specific here. And really, you can kind of tweak it to find the sound that you like. This is what I found that I liked, and I think it sounds pretty good in this case. So that's all well and good, but that doesn't sound like a heavy metal guitar. Well, you can think of just like a normal, electric guitar without any sort of amplifier or any sort of, effect on it. It doesn't really sound like much. It doesn't even I would say doesn't even sound as good as an acoustic guitar by itself, right? So same thing here. We need to actually take that output from rings and turn it into something. So what we're going to turn it into is we're going to turn it into our distortion sound. So we're going to take our output from rings and we're going to put it into the input of our 100 grit. And we'll just turn 100 grit just to normal mode right now. And we're going to take the output of the 100 grit and put that into our chain. So now the 100 grit is pretty noisy. I don't know if this is specific to this patch or specific to, my module. I have found it to be pretty noisy, so we'll probably turn this up and down as we play with it, but let's see what this sounds like. And one more time for good measure. Okay, so we're getting somewhere, right? We're getting a more guitar kind of heavy metal sound. Now, is it Metallica? Is it, Godsmack, somebody like that? No, not right now. I think we're getting there. We're not quite there yet. So things to note on my patch here for the 100 grit. Input is turned up, but not so far as to be distorting. All of the other for input 2 and all of the CV stuff is turned pretty far down. I have some Ochd, again, just for modulation. This is modulating the frequency cutoff just barely. It's really attenuated, so it doesn't do too much, but it does kind of give it a little bit of a life to it. Our gain turned up to about 75% as well. So like realistically, only 3 things are being affected here. 4 if you count the kind of 100x mode, which we'll turn on in a second. So what does 100x sound like? Let's wait for the next cycle. There's our heavy metal guitar sound, right? Now we're starting to get that really heavy overdrive distortion onto it and really getting that really very dirty, very metal sound, my opinion anyway. Let's play a different part of the track. And that's really the patch, right? Like, I don't think there's too much more to say there. I think, and I don't know this, I don't have any other modules to really test with, but I don't think there's anything too specific here to the 100 grit. If you had another distortion module, you could try that and see if it, comes up with the same effect. Rings is really doing a lot of the work here, as well as Zadar with its really very strange envelope. There's probably other ways to achieve both of those effects, but again, you'd have to find the specific modules to do that. I know in this case, obviously, these two work, so that's what I'm using here. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for checking it out. If this interests you, if you like this style of kind of patch notes or voice notes, please let me know in the comments. I'm going to try to make more of these as I come up with fun and interesting things with the synthesizer. So thanks for checking us out and have a good day.